Welcome back to the beginner side of Live2D Beginner vs Pro. In this episode, we'll be starting on the body of our model. Before we work on our main XYZ movements, however, we'll be setting up the body physics first. We're going to make our shirt swish, arms sway, as well as rigging breath, so our model will look like they're breathing. Let's start with our clothing physics. Let's go ahead and make our mesh for all of our clothing parts first. Now, when we're thinking about what we should be adding physics to on our model, we want to consider how our body movements would affect things in real life. For example, looser articles of clothing, such as our shirt here, would have some swaying physics, as opposed to these leggings, which are relatively skin tight, which wouldn't have extra physics. To keep things simple, we're going to add physics to the main part of our shirt, as well as the sleeves. Let's set up our parameters. We're going to make two parameters for our X physics, called shirt Phys X1 and shirt Phys X2. And we'll also need two parameters for our Y physics, called shirt Phys Y1 and shirt Phys Y2. Make sure to set the minimum to -30 and the maximum to 30. When you're making physics for clothes, I recommend separating each article of clothing into their own parameter groups. For example, if we had a skirt, we'd create new parameters called skirt Phys X1, X2, etc. That's because sometimes we may need more or less parameters for our clothing, as well as different physics settings. If you remember the hair physics episode, we added one extra deformer for our longer pieces of hair. The same applies to clothing. For example, a long skirt would look much better with an extra physics parameter. We'll set up our X physics first. This will be our left-right sway when we move body X. Create a new warp deformer for our shirt main and bottom shader, called shirt main Phys X, and one for each sleeve and arm shader, called shirt sleeve right Phys X and left Phys X. We'll also need 3 keyforms on both our shirt Phys X parameters for all of these new deformers. Select the shirt main deformer first. We have 2 physics parameters to work with. The best way to think of our setup is big movements first, and small movements as we use more parameters. So, starting with Phys X1, first let's increase the Bezier division in the inspector window. Set it to a height of 4, which will add more green Beziers on our deformer like this. I recommend also increasing the warp division to add more control points. It'll make our shirt a little more smooth when we deform it. We don't want the whole shirt to sway, just the looser part around halfway down. Set Phys X1 to 30, and we're going to move these lower Beziers to the right. Not the very bottom ones quite yet. Make sure to not deform too far that the shirt ends up clipping past our body though. We can set up the other side using motion mirroring. Moving down to Phys X2, we're going to rig it very similarly to X1, but using the very bottom Beziers like this. Don't forget to use motion mirroring to set up the other side. Before we move on to the sleeves, make sure to synthesize our corners, since we rigged both parameters on the same deformer. Now for our sleeves. These have a very similar setup. This time, we'll set the Bezier division height to 3 instead of 4, since these are smaller parts. Let's hide the main shirt for now, so we can see the whole part whilst we rig. When we rig Phys X1 here, since our part is at an angle, we'll need to adjust our deformation to compensate for the shape. In this case, we'll need to deform the sleeves slightly diagonally. So, at 30, as we deform to the right, we want to raise the right and middle Bezier, and lower the left Bezier a bit. We can use motion mirroring, but I recommend just double checking the reflection. In this case it looks fine, but we may end up needing to make small adjustments to the deformer due to the less symmetrical shape of this part. We repeat this for Phys X2 with our lower Beziers. And again, if we use the motion mirroring, just make sure to check the deformation on the other side. Synthesize our corners for Phys X1 and X2, and that's our first sleeve done. We can repeat this process on the other side, or wait till we set up Phys Y to use the reflect trick. Once we're happy with our X physics, we can move on to our Y physics. We'll need to create a new deformer above our current X physics deformer for this. Shirt main Y, sleeve left and right Y. Create free keyforms on both shirt Phys Y1 and Phys Y2. Starting with our shirt main again, this time we're going to create bouncy physics. For Y130, we're going to move the lower and bottom middle Bezier upward, and the lower sides up too, but not quite as much. We won't be able to use reflect motion here, so we'll need to set up -30 manually. This will be the opposite of Y130, so move the lower middle Beziers down, and the lower the sides as well. The setup for Y2 will be a little different. We'll need to create a squash and stretch motion to compensate for the up and down motion of Y1, as currently it looks like the shirt gets smaller at Y130 and larger at Y1-30. At Y230, we'll pull the lower side Beziers outward like this. And the opposite at Y2-30, we'll push them inward, making sure we don't clip into the body again. Synthesize our corners for both Phys Y parameters, and we can move on to our sleeves. Our sleeves are going to be the exact same setup as our main shirt. Depending on the shape of the part, we may need to make our deformers slightly diagonal again to maintain the overall shape of the sleeve. Once we're done with this side, if you decided to use the reflect method over rigging both sides individually, you can copy and reflect our sleeve and deformers over to the other side. If you're not sure how to do this, I covered this method back in episode 1. Now that we have both sets of physics set up, we can make our physics groups. Open up the physics settings in the modeling menu. Click Add, and we'll make a group for our X physics first. So, let's name this shirt X. We can set the input preset to body input, but leave the output preset blank. The new group should have body X as a position input, and body Z as an angle input here. Now, we'll want to add 2 pendulums by clicking Add down here twice. And we'll need to change the shaking influence on both to 0.89. The other settings should be fine. Now, let's add our 2 Phys X parameters as outputs, and make sure to increase output if it's not moving around that much. Now, our shirt should switch around. For our Physics Y group, we'll start by duplicating our Shirt X group, and renaming it to Shirt Y. We'll want to change our Body X input to Body Y by finding it on the drop-down menu, and then delete Angle Z entirely from the input list. Finally, we just need to swap our output parameters to Phys Y1 and Y2, and that should now work for both X and Y. As a note, if your model is not reacting to body Y when you drag your cursor around by default, you can change your settings by going into Preview, then Settings of the cursor tracking. This will bring up a menu of all your parameters. Find body Y, which may say Unset. If we click this, it will have a drop-down menu. We can select left mouse button Y, so it will track when we click and drag our left mouse button up and down. I actually recommend setting angle and body Z to right mouse button X, so it's easier to test these out in this menu. Now we'll move on to our arms. It's nice to add some sway to our arms so they don't end up looking static when we rig our body turns. Make sure to create mesh for our arms and hands. For our arms, we're going to rig the left and right arm on separate parameters, unlike our shirt physics. We'll need to make 3 parameters: arm right Phys 1, arm right Phys 2, and arm right Phys 3. And create 3 for the arm left as well. Now, for our deformers. We want to group all of our hand pieces into one deformer called hand right Phys. Then, select our hand deformer and our lower arm, and create a warp called lower arm right Phys. Finally, select our lower arm deformer, as well as our sleeve Phys Y and upper arm, and name this upper arm right Phys. Make sure to set up the left side also. Let's start with arm right Phys 1. We'll need to set 3 keyforms on only our upper arm right Phys deformer for this one. We also want to change the warp division to 8 width and 15 height. so we have more control points like before. Now, let me show you a super easy way to rig this parameter. Set our Phys1 parameter to -30, and we're going to click and drag our mouse to select all of our control points just below the top of the shoulder here. Now, go into the modeling menu, temporary deform tool, but this time we're going to select rotation. This will put a temporary rotation deformer on our part. We can move the center of our rotation by dragging the red reticle to our shoulder here. Since we have part of our warp deformer selected, the rotation tool will only affect the selected part of the deformer, rather than the whole thing. So we don't end up breaking the top part of the shirt. We want to rotate this left or outward. Click the tick to confirm, then we'll need to set up the opposite side the same way. Don't push this angle too far inward, it should end up relatively flush to the body. Moving on to arm right Phys 2, this time we'll set 3 keyforms on lower arm right Phys. We can actually use the same method for this deformer too, but we can use the whole deformer this time, not just a selection. We'll use the temporary rotation tool to rotate the lower arm to the left and right again. Make sure to place the rotation reticle at the elbow here. Once we've set up both keyforms and tested out, you might notice a little disconnect between the upper and lower arms. All we need to do is adjust the top beziers of our lower arm deformer to make sure they stay connected to our upper arm. Finally, for arm right Phys 3, and once again, we're using the temporary rotation tool. This is exactly the same as Phys 2. We'll place the rotation reticle at the wrist, and rotate left at -30, and right at 30, making sure to correct any disconnect using the top beziers afterward. That should be our right arm physics fully rigged. So now we can rig the left side. You can also use the copy and reflect method for our left arm. Check to reflect our physics parameters, and make sure to change the rigging on our new left arm deformers to the parameters we set up for arm physics left, using the change button on this menu, and making sure we transfer right Phys1 to left Phys1, and so on. Also, make sure to rename our parts and deformers so we don't get them confused later. Now, back to our physics settings. We're going to create a new physics group called arm right. We'll select body input for our input preset again, leaving the output preset blank. This time, we'll need to add body Y as an extra input, changing body X effectiveness to 50 and body Y to 50 as well. We'll need to create 3 pendulums this time, setting the shaking effectiveness to 0.89 again. We'll also want to change the normalization of input for both position and angle to -30, 0, 30. That way, our arms will stay tilted for body Z, whilst retaining the effectiveness for body X and Y. Now, we can add our arm Phys right parameters to our output, test it out a little, and increase the output so they'll start swinging more. We can duplicate this group for our arm left, making sure to change the name and the output parameters to the left Phys parameters we set up. Now, here's why we separated left and right. You'll notice for our body Y that our arms sway the same way. It should look more bouncy rather than swaying. To correct this, all we need to do is find body Y on our input list for arm left and click the reflect box here. That will reverse the input for us, for just body Y. So, now it will look bouncy for Y and sway for X. Before we wrap up this episode, we're going to set up a breath parameter. Live2D will already have one created by default, so we don't need to worry about making a new one. We want to select all of our upper body parts, so the parent deformers we've created so far, as well as our neck and shoulder parts. Now, create a new warp deformer called breath. Since this deformer will be above our XYZ deformers we'll create in the next episode, we want to extend this deformer a bit first. Hold Ctrl and Alt, then expand the deformer out a bit. Now we'll want to create 2 keyforms on our breath parameter. 0 will be our default position, or exhale. whilst one will be our inhale. We want to deform the middle and middle side Beziers upward, as if we're taking in air. We don't need this to be too excessive. Next, change the Bezier division to a width of 3 and height of 5, so we have more Beziers to work with. We want to expand the chest out a little when we're breathing, so pull out these two middle Beziers like this. That's all we need to do for breath. If you open up your physics window, you should see our model is already breathing now, as Live2D will set this parameter to auto-breathe by default, as well as most tracking programs for VTubing. And we're all done with our body physics. Let's quickly go over what we learnt in this episode. We learnt about creating physics for clothing, separating X and Y for unique physics. We created arm physics using the temporary rotation tool, create an easy sway motion. And finally, we learnt how to make our model breathe using a warp deformer. The next beginner episode will cover our body angles, the final episode in the beginner series. Thank you to my Ko-Fi members for supporting the channel, especially our ultra shiny treasure Pulse and super shiny treasure Toxan. If you'd like to support the channel, please check out my Ko-Fi link in the description below. Take care and have fun in Live2D. Why can I not say right?